Well, everybody should be aware that Department of Finance and Homelands approved a 3-month extension of loan payments, deferment of loan payments, which means folks don't have to pay until January. So good news to start off the.
Right on.
That was my entire speech, so I guess I'm done for the day.
You're done, Tyler? Okay.
Right on. Okay, aloha, gang. We see people trickling in. We have a number of guests joining us. Aloha, welcome to Aloha Rising. We'll give everyone a few minutes to enter into our Zoom room this afternoon. But while we're waiting, if you folks want to just check in, shout out, say aloha, let us know where you're watching from.
Wow, Boston. All right.
That's right next to Nanakuli, I think.
Boston, Massachusetts. Kia'ao. Stephanie from Kauai, aloha. Carly from Boston. Some of
Quite a few of the islands represented.
We get Kauai, Kalihi Valley in the house, Paua. Couple Kauai folks, Maui, Kahului, Hawaii Island.
Oh, welcome, council member.
Aloha, council member from Hawaii Island. Okay, so we'll get started. So welcome everybody to Aloha Rising. This is the third installment of our most recent series of webinars that we're hosting on Thursday afternoons. And you know, the intent here is to activate our civic engagement. You know, what we did a few months ago was we ran through a series of webinars where we had speakers join us, experts in some of our history and mo'olelo that helped us connect the dots in terms of our history, Native Hawaiian cultural identity, and our kuleana to be civically engaged and to identify what our kuleana is on a day-to-day basis in terms of so many of the issues that we face. So in this latest round, we're actually diving into some of our most pressing issues. Today, we're going to talk about affordable housing and the housing crisis. And we have a very, a splendid group of panelists this afternoon who have expertise in this area and who are probably some of the most committed individuals that I am aware of in terms of digging in and really going to work for our lahui and in the community. These tackling these types of, just it's hard for me to describe. The magnitude of the housing issue is really, really immense. So, major respect, props, shout outs, kudos to all of you who do it on a day-to-day basis, because it's almost very much so seems like an insurmountable mountain to climb. And we're gonna dive into it, and hopefully we can take some positive out of it, and we can talk about some solutions, and we can talk about what we collectively can do to kind of start to tackle this issue and make a dent if possible. I just want to point out that initially we had 5 panelists scheduled, one of whom couldn't make it due to some personal issues, and the other was Senator Stanley Cheng, and I want to apologize to him and the viewers. As we were coordinating this, he's the chair of the Housing Committee in the Senate, and I mean, he's one of the champions in the state Senate, and he's also running for office this year, and that never crossed our mind. And OHA has a policy that, you know, for these types of broadcasts, we won't provide airtime to one candidate without providing equal airtime to the opponent. It's just an in-house policy. And I overlooked that as we were coordinating. So I take the blame. And so we had to ask him to maybe join us after the election, and we can host another discussion. So mahalo to you folks that are here. Thank you. And I'll just introduce our co-moderator this afternoon. And then I'll hand off to him, and we can start talking, hearing from our panelists. But you know, Jeff Gilbreath, he's one of those people that I was just talking about, does this work on a day-to-day basis. Hawaii Community Lending and Hawaii Community Assets, two nonprofit organizations that do amazing work. The homestead community and, you know, Native Hawaiian community at large in terms of creative lending and financing that's helping families get access to loans that traditional lending institutions don't normally, you know, it's an easier path than traditional lending institutions. And so amazing work. They've been doing it for years. So mahalo for joining us, Jeff, and agreeing to co-moderate this with our OHA team.
Mahalo, Davis, and great to have everybody on. Getting close to 100 participants. Let's see if we crack that milestone. But yeah, as Davis shared, I'm Jeff Gilbreath, Director of Lending and Development at Hawaiian Community Assets and Hawaii Community Lending. And really the reason I'm here, as Davis pointed out, is that our organizations have been fighting for affordable housing, particularly for Native Hawaiian communities for the last 20 years. And so we celebrated our 20th anniversary in the midst of COVID, and continued the good work. And so with that said, you're not here to listen to me, you're here to listen to these three other panelists. And so what I'd like for our panelists to do is introduce themselves as well, similarly to what I did. And so maybe to start, I'm just gonna go based on who's on my screen first. Tyler, can I have you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Ano kako, Ovo o Tyler Kepa Gomes. I'm the Deputy to the Chairman for the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. I think at its core, the Department of Hawaiian Homelands is affordable housing. And when you think about it like that, our mission really is not only to serve Native Hawaiians and put them in homes, but it is to think creatively about how to solve these problems. As many know, the department is the product of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act of 1920, which was passed actually in July of 1921. So we will make 100 years of existence next July. And all thanks to the advocacy of Prince Jonah Kuhio Kalanianaole, who was a non-voting member, he was essentially, he's a non-voting member, indigenous person who managed to lobby the United States Congress to pass this incredible act. And obviously the purpose was to rehabilitate Native Hawaiians, but what rehabilitation looked like 99 years ago is a lot different than what it looks like today. But somewhere in there, the notes of affordable housing have sort of always driven the department. So really happy to be here, really happy to serve under an administration that is open to considering all kinds of new ideas right now. I think that's what we need, particularly in this time of the pandemic. I hope everyone at home is staying safe, wearing their masks, social distancing, but also how do we solve the same problems that we've been working on for 99 years in the face of the limitations that this pandemic is bringing upon us. And that's sort of a day-to-day super exciting adventure, but challenging nonetheless. Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler. And then going around on my screen, Becky, if you'd like to go next, introduce yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Aloha kako. My name is Becky Soon. I'm the Deputy Director at the Department of Community Services for the City and County of Honolulu. We're a little known department that most people have never heard of. And we are happy to fly under the radar most of the time. But our kuleana really is to try to serve communities. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but it's really to serve our most vulnerable communities. And so our mission is around our kupuna It's around our families who are experiencing homelessness and houselessness. It's around our families who are living at or below the poverty line. And so this has been a very difficult time for many of the families that we work with on a day-to-day basis who were vulnerable before COVID, and COVID has just exposed and exacerbated many of those vulnerabilities. In the affordable housing space, sometimes people really like to separate out these two issues. And so I'm just really thankful to everyone on the panel today, to everyone watching, that we're marrying back again the needs of our community together with affordable housing. That these are not separate issues. We know, for example, that many people who experience homelessness have jobs. We know, for example, that many people who experience mental health issues actually first become homeless and then are triggered by the trauma of living on the streets. And then that trauma then leads to this additional cycle that kicks in, especially for many of our Kanaka families. And so the importance of marrying together the idea of affordable housing, not to overstate it, but I think if Senator Chang, who I wish could join us, often talks about, this, what would you do if you had a magic wand? If I had a magic wand, I would build 22,200 homes tomorrow, because the needs that addresses for our community and the ways that opens up the options for our community to stabilize, to build healthy lives, to be able to really get back to a decent quality of living. Unfortunately, I think we're still striving for a decent quality of living for many of our families. That to me would be my magic wand. So I'm really excited to have a conversation today about some of those ideas and to be on with one of the, what I often remind Tyler, which he knows well, as the largest affordable housing developer in the state. DHHL is, we oftentimes think about where we're falling short, as we need to, but there is incredible work that the people that we all that are on this do, and incredible communities that we serve. So just mahalo for allowing me to be on. And I'm excited to share a little bit about today, I think, the areas in which we're working in the city to address the needs, especially of lower income affordable housing. Again, I think that there is so much more that we need to do. Obviously, the city has a big kuleana that we carry, and I think it's fair when community asks questions about what are we doing to meet the gaps that we're not serving. But I think that there's models for what we've done, what others have done, what DHHL has done, that we can lend to one another to say, okay, how do we leverage those models and use those as examples to scale? So mahalo again for having me.
Thank you, Becky. And then I'll shift over to Gavin. You want to introduce yourself, Gavin?
Sure thing. Thanks, Jeff. Aloha, everybody. Wonderful to be here. My name's Gavin Thornton. I'm the Executive Director of the Hawaii Appleseed. Oh my gosh, I just forgot our name. We're the Hawaii Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice. I've got a little stage fright, I guess. Hawaii Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice. We're a research and advocacy organization that's focused on trying to change systems and policies to help create a Hawaii where everybody can thrive. The housing issue is obviously a huge, huge part of that. And, I think everybody, nearly everybody here experiences that. I myself have 3 daughters. My teenage daughter just texted me. This is hilarious. Are you guys alive? Because no one responded to me. She called like 5 minutes ago. Trying to find a home to shelter her and that hilarious attitude and all of us. I just know it's such an important issue for so many families. And so one of the big issues that we focus on at Appleseed.
Excellent, Gavin, and thank you, Tyler, Becky. Great to have you folks on. So just to inform everybody what we're going to be looking like in terms of an agenda today, we're going to be handing it over back to Gavin. He's going to be sharing really just to lay the context of what are we looking at in terms of demand related to affordable housing, and how it's impacting, in particular, Native Hawaiian community. And then we're going to hand it off to the panel, and we're going to go one by one and talk through solutions that each of these leaders are bringing forward and that they're champions of, how it would work. And then we're going to break it out for some Q&A. So as folks are speaking, if you have questions, we're not going to open up for everybody to join the Zoom, obviously, but you can use the chat box and the chat function. So we encourage you to do that. Just a couple of quick announcements. I said at the beginning of this, but I just got an announcement from Department of Hawaiian Homelands that they have extended their loan deferment program. So from October through the end of December, folks who have mortgages with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands will be able to defer their payments. And so Tyler, that's some good news that we got right as we came into this. And the second is just to share with you folks, if you need assistance with rent and mortgage payments, the Hawaii County Rent and Mortgage Assistance Program is up and running. It's a program that our organization is running with 5 other nonprofits. We just passed our $1.5 million mark in the first 3 weeks. We have 7 million to get out in total, but it looks like we're gonna spend that money far before the end of November. And so if you're on Hawaii Island, or if you have family members who are there, folks you know, if you have been impacted by COVID, either lost income or reduced work hours, apply for this program. And I'll drop in the chat box a link to that website, but also note that there is a state rent relief program that's available to folks across the state. So those are 2 things I just want to get out there and share with you folks. All 83 of you who are participating, I want you to share that out. But with that said, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Gavin to lay the context for us. And Gavin has a presentation. So Gavin, if you will.
Thank you. All right. Man, during the midst of the pandemic, I don't like to be the bearer of more bad news. And this probably isn't news to most folks. I'm just going to quickly run through, before we talk about our forward-thinking solutions, just quickly run through like what the gist of the problem is. So this quote here came from a study. Hawaii has had a serious housing problem for many years. The problem has now become a crisis. The real problem is, this study is from 1970. So over, what is that, 50 years ago, we were calling what we were in then a housing crisis. And when you look at how that crisis has gotten worse and worse over time, you see the significant changes, significant worsening. So more renters are cost burdened now than in the past. In 1968, around the time that study was written, 23% of Honolulu renters were paying more than 30% of their income for rent, whereas in 2016, that percentage had more than doubled to 54%. When we're talking about what's affordable in terms of housing and housing costs, rent, we're generally talking about 30% of your income is what's considered to be affordable. This in front of you right now is what's called a monthly self-sufficiency budget for a family of 2 adults, 2 children. This was calculated by the state, close to $7,000 a month that a family needs to make. Most families, or very many families, are not making it. Monthly housing costs for this, for this example, run around $2,000. That's close to 30% of someone's income, and folks are really struggling to make that much and to afford housing. The problem has gotten a lot worse. These stats are back comparing 1980 to 2018, so about a 40-year period. Over that time, after adjusting for inflation, You know, our low wage workers are making less than $1 an hour more than they were back in 1980. Our middle wage workers, just a little over $2 more than they were back then. Our highway wage workers have been doing much better at $12 an hour. The reason why I'm talking about wages when we're talking about housing is it's two parts of the equation. It's not just that housing costs are going up, it's that wages aren't. And you really see that here. Over that time period, housing costs grew by over $8,000 annually on average. So low wage workers, middle wage workers, that means that housing is becoming further and further out of reach for them. Back in 1980, low wage workers were spending about 54% of their income towards housing costs, or if they were renting a one-bedroom market priced apartment. Now it's 80% of their wages would go toward that apartment price. For middle wage workers, it's 29%, just barely affordable for folks back then, and now so far out of reach at 46%. You know, part of the equation is also construction of housing units. And you see that over time, this goes back to 1960. You know, we peaked in the 70s and the number of units that have been produced has been getting lower and lower and lower. Right now, our projected housing demands through 2025 are that we need to build over 50,000 units. Out of that number, 14,000, almost 14,500 needed by Native Hawaiian households. And the demand for that housing is primarily for households that are making less than $25,000 a year. So this graph shows the housing need at the various income levels and shows that the bulk of that need is below 100,000 and actually below 75,000. 62% of the units needed are for households making less than $75,000 a year. And here's the kicker, is that most of the units available are far out of reach for those folks. These are housing costs in Hawaii. The green lines are Hawaii. The blue lines are US. Ours is skewed toward the high value homes that folks that really need the housing most can't afford. And in conjunction with that, you know, we've been seeing our homeless rates go up and then in recent years coming down. I think one important thing to note about this is that when this graph starts in 2011, 2012, you know, we were just coming out of the recession. Our homeless rates continued to go up and up. We have started to get a handle on it, and now the pandemic's hit. We're facing a new recession. And so there are big fears that we're going to see another resurgence, even before we got down to the levels we were at 9-10 years ago. Native Hawaiians are especially at risk of homelessness. 32% of Native Hawaiian households are at risk versus 23% of non-Native Hawaiian households. These are pre-pandemic figures, so you know, I assume that these numbers have gone up. So I will stop there so that we can talk about the moving forward. How are we going to get a handle on this? Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. And just a note of clarification, it is the majority of those units are for folks making $75,000 and less. I think, Gavin, you had mentioned 25,000 initially.
Oh,
but
sorry.
It's okay. The graph was very clear, right? That, you know, folks are making 75,000 less. Those are the folks who need this the most. So I appreciate that, Gavin. I think that sets a context for us to jump into this next part of our presentation. And so we're going to be going and having each of the presenters share with us a solution that they are a champion of related to affordable housing and how it would work. And so we're going to go down the panel. We're going to start with Tyler Gomes. We'll go to Becky Soon next, and then we'll give Gavin a little bit of a rest, have him go at the end. But as you guys are listening to these presentations, what we're recommending is to use the chat box. Put those questions in the chat box. We probably won't have time to answer all of them. However, we'll do what we can on this presentation here today. And what we can't, we can maybe follow up with the presenters and get some of that information to you afterwards. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Tyler Gomes, the Deputy Director of Department of Hawaii and Homelands. And Tyler, what we're wanting to know from you is what's one affordable housing solution that you are a champion of right now, and how would it work?
Thanks, Jeff. I also want to thank you, Jeff, for highlighting our loan deferrals. So for those of you who are watching who do have mortgages directly with the department, an extension has been granted for another 3 months. You can contact your loan officer if you have questions about that. There was a question in the comments about rental assistance for waitlisters. The department actually has a program for that. So if you are on the wait list as of December 31st, 2018, and you have suffered impacts related to COVID and are unable to make your bills. So for example, maybe you can make the electricity and the cable, but you're not able to make the rent. All you need to do is dial 211 and you can work with Aloha United Way, our partners, and they can help explain our rental assistance program for waitlisters. So I hope that that offers some assistance to that question that came up. As far as a solution, as I mentioned right at the beginning, I just think that Hawaiian Homes is affordable housing. And so I think the solution is the department, one, needs to continue doing what it's doing, and two, again, needs to continue exploring all possibilities for a diversification of the opportunities. So I think what a lot of people picture when they think of what Hawaiian Homelands does is the land is given, a house is built, and then that house is turned over to an eventual lessee beneficiary, and that's sort of the story. And that's only one part of what we do. And so what we call that model of our offerings, that's a turnkey home, right? And so the department pays for the infrastructure underneath the home, so electric, sewer, water, and then the beneficiary will normally pay for or they will mortgage the vertical construction. And the average price let's talk about the median price of homes in Kapolei, for example. It's right around $630,000, $650,000 in Kapolei. The turnkey homes that we offered in Kapolei come out around $360,000. So about half of what the median home offering is. So in and of itself, that's what I mean when I say the Department of Hawaiian Homelands is affordable housing. And something to consider is in the development of these homes, when we build the infrastructure for Kapolei, for example, and I'm pointing behind me because that's right outside my window. The cost of the department was about $150,000 a unit, right? If you consider many of our more rural homesteads, for example, up in Waiahuli on Maui, which are on a steep slope, there are drainage issues, the infrastructural costs go up. And I offer this because I think sometimes the expectation is, why isn't the department doing more to address the wait list? So here's some really simple math to sort of, if the point of this webinar today is to get people thinking about how they can civically engage to improve the affordable housing situation, let's look at the math. Right now, there are about 29,000 individuals on the wait list. If we had to just develop the lots for those 29,000 individuals and just put in the infrastructure, let's not even count the vertical, $150,000 at the minimum for 28,000 units is somewhere around $4.5–5 billion, right? The department hasn't received $5 billion in 100 years of existence. And so that's why I mentioned diversification, because obviously the answer is not going to come in the form of DHHL build more houses, because if we could, we would. And believe me, like Becky, if I had a magic wand, I would just do it. But the math makes it a little more difficult. So in addition to turnkey homes, I'd say in the last 8 years, we've really ramped up the vacant lot offering. So sometimes a turnkey home, even at that $350,000 price, is still out of reach for many beneficiaries. So with the vacant lot offering, we still put in the infrastructure, but the beneficiary has the opportunity to build whatever they want on the lot, whether it's a tiny home, which can be very affordable, or they can work with partners like Habitat for Humanity, who allow sweat equity to build these homes. These are ways for those individuals who can't afford the typical turnkey option to build something that they want to their liking. Another diversified option would be our subsistence agricultural lots. So on the subsistence agricultural lots, because it's usually rural infrastructure that puts lower cost in the development of the unit, they can still build a home on it, and they can also provide food for the family. So the traditional agricultural lot offering was a lot larger, sometimes unmanageable for some families. Many Ohana are gentlemen farmers. They're not all are interested in the commercial farming operation. So with the development of the subsistence agricultural lot offering, it makes it a little bit more accessible, a little bit easier for those who are looking for an agricultural lease. Then we have our affordable rentals. You might have seen in the news recently, we finally have a developer for the 820 Eisenberg property, formerly known as the Bolodrome. And we're looking at, thank you, we're looking at about 260 affordable rental units in that structure. And that's not our only, that's not the only project we intend to do for rentals, but sometimes it's very difficult for beneficiaries to qualify for mortgages. And so offering a rental program allows them, one, to experience the benefits of the department sort of taking care of the underlying infrastructural costs at a reduced rent that is much more affordable. And then they have the opportunity to prepare themselves financially for when the time comes that they are eligible for a mortgage and they can qualify for a home of their own. We've also got multifamily development. So for example, at the East Kapolei rail station, we're building multifamily units. That's another sort of new foray into development. And that's important because as the rail system comes up, we are really going to need to focus on what they call transit-oriented development, or TOD development, for those along the rail line. The idea is that if you have quick and easy access to the rail, your reliance on the traditional automobile sort of goes down. And so I see a question in there, 260 out of how many total? I think the total unit count is 260. So that I think the goal is affordable for all. But I can double check on that for Napua Harbottle, who asked that question. But increasing our TOD developments. And then lastly, we're currently working on amending our rules to allow for supplemental dwelling units. We recognize that it doesn't make sense that everyone else in their respective counties can build a supplemental dwelling unit, and yet beneficiaries can't. We're working really hard to change that, particularly with multi-generational families. It just makes sense for those who have room on their properties to build a supplemental dwelling unit. There are some legal sort of complications we got to work through. Maybe not complications is not the right word, but we need to work through the legalities of it. But that's something we are actively working on. So that, to me, diversification and continuing to expand upon all the creative possibilities really shifts the perspective from how many people are on the wait list to how many beneficiaries are you serving? Because with the rentals, we're able to serve people without reducing the wait list. And how you metricize the department's success sort of has to change, because if the goal really is to serve beneficiaries, then these sort of varied offerings do a much better job than if we were just to sit in our seats and say, we're just going to keep building the same number of homes every single year. Over the next 5 years, we're looking to produce about 1,300 lots, 50% of which will be residential. Obviously, that's sort of where we're at on the minimum end. And this administration will be done in about 2 years. So there's always the potential to grow that number. But again, when you look at the cost, we are the state's largest affordable housing developer. Becky's right. But at the rate that this is going, it takes a bit of time. And that brings me to my final point, in that, we have, for example, in Honolulu, Becky mentioned this, there is a need for there's a 22,000 unit housing shortage on Honolulu alone. The department has an 11,000 residential wait list on Oahu Island. If we start thinking more about, these are the same, like we're trying to achieve the same goal. You can build all 11,000 homestead lots and still reduce the housing unit need by 11,000. That's a win-win for the state and for the department. And what that brings me to is, I appreciate Senator Chang for his willingness to consider some really innovative options with the Aloha Homes proposal. And I'm not going to speak to that because it's not mine and I don't want to mischaracterize it. But what I would offer is, if the mission of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands is codified in the Constitution, it's a condition of statehood, it's really a kako thing. It's all of our responsibilities. It's not just the department's. And so if we recognize that the department is struggling to meet the demand, and the demand is 28,000 long, it might be more prudent to expend resources in supporting the department in a way that facilitates the state's overall goals, rather than leaving the department to build its 28,000 wait list and a separate initiative putting funds and resources into building an equal amount of affordable homes under the Aloha Homes program. And so, without mischaracterizing at all what Senator Chang has worked on, what I would say is a unique way to look at this is Hawaiian homes are Aloha homes. And if there is an appetite for using resources to develop affordable housing, then finding ways to sort of support the department in what is a very difficult task achieves many goals at once. And so that's what I'm thinking, forward thinking. I know a whole bunch of questions have just come up, and I apologize.
Don't worry, Tyler. I got you, brother. That's my kuleana.
Okay.
So no, I think you've brought a lot of good information forward. A couple things. I think one, to your point you were just making, I think there's interest. Have public agencies at the state, county been talking together with the HHL, and have you guys been advocating for this to go in and share the infrastructure costs, right? The DHHL may put some dollars in, but how about the city and county? How about the state? In addition, has that conversation happened yet? Can
you repeat that question? Sorry, I got distracted reading all the questions in the sidebar.
So the question is you're talking about the need. The need is great for Hawaiian Homelands, is great everywhere, but there's a way that we can address the need on Hawaiian Homelands and address affordable housing, the need and demand overall. So the question is, has the Department of Hawaiian Homelands started conversations with the city and county, other counties, and or the state to help with infrastructure costs? You had estimated $150,000 per unit average cost. Has there been discussions about tapping these other funds to invest in the infrastructure on Hawaiian Homelands?
Yeah, I think that the discussion has, let's be super clear, there's no magic bullet for this problem. I think that discussion has happened many times over many administrations. But I think we should continue to have that discussion, just because it necessarily hasn't gone anywhere. And we've been really fortunate to have the support of the counties and the state in a number of different objectives. So I think that there's synergy there. I know Becky at OCS, she's downplaying how important by saying that she's a little known department. OCS has done a lot of really wonderful things for affordable housing. And just the fact that the ability to have that discussion exists between our two agencies sort of answers that question of, yeah, that discussion is ongoing. It's just a matter of figuring out how to do it.
I think it's great that we have both of you on this webinar, because I think a great follow-up to this is to get you guys together and let's be strategizing how do we actually make that happen, get some of that shared infrastructure costs. A couple more questions for you, Tyler. So the rental units that are going up in at the old Bolodrome,
yep.
Is it renting to beneficiaries only?
I believe, yes, I believe so. As of last update, I don't believe there's any plans to rent to non-beneficiaries. I think that that would be problematic. I know there's a question out there for, are rentals available to waitlisters only? And do you lose your place on the wait list? The answer is no, you don't lose your place on the wait list. It is for waitlisters, and should an award come up, I think the idea is, and we're sort of just putting this out, but the idea is at the time that you are eligible for an award and you receive it, then you move from your rental unit and from the wait list into a full-time unit. There's a question about the number of people awaiting homes in Aloha. I apologize, Stephen. I think it's Stephen Kawi. I apologize. I don't have for Aloha specifically. I know for Kauai, we're looking at about 1,700 waitlisters on residential, another 2,200 on ag, and about 300 on pastoral. So I know that's not the best answer because you asked about Aloha specifically, but
it's all good. It's all good, Tyler. I think we'll tie up your end, but there was a really good question from Lanakila, and I think have discussions been happening as well as with other Hawaiian trusts in relation to, I think, the conversation around infrastructure costs and costs of affordable housing. So if you want to try and take that one, we'll close you out and I'll hand it over to Becky.
Yeah, absolutely. There are regular discussions with many of those individuals, and not just about housing, about all kinds of problems that we're trying to solve. I think there are environmental impacts that we all have similar interests that are aligned on. So yes, there are discussions amongst the trusts. OHA is another agency, nonprofits, people who are aligned in vision. And then I'll just really quickly, that last question from Nicole about, is it just transitional housing? No, it is not transitional housing. It's affordable rental. So technically it's not meant as a transitional housing project.
Thank you so much, Tyler. We'll leave it there. Folks, if you do have additional questions, we're tracking them, and we'll make sure that we get those. But we will now have to shift gears and get it over to our next panelist. But Tyler, thank you so much for your time. But stay on with us because I might be doing something a little different toward the end. So Becky, I would love to hand it over to you. So Becky Soon, Deputy at Department of Community Services at the City and County. So Becky, looking for what is that solution you're championing and how would it work?
Mahalo. I'm going to give a little bit of sort of framing of how we got here, if I could. I'll figure out how to do this multi-dimensional process one day. Okay. So what I want to talk about a little bit is sort of a community-based housing idea, and I'll back into it. Gavin already went through a lot of this, so I'm not going to go through it in detail, but where we are constantly looking is essentially what is the demand for the City and County of Honolulu, which is all of Oahu, in terms of housing needs, both rental and ownership. And my department's more focused on rentals. And then at the different area median income levels, which I'm going to talk slightly about. I promise I won't get too wonky, but I do think it's always helpful to sort of dive a little bit into what does affordability mean. And so, what we're looking at for the entire islands of Oahu is the right side of the table. We have all of Hawaii. What is the demand for units? And then the second half of the chart on the bottom for Honolulu specifically, the total demand for units is 22,000 units, 22,168, with some of those units being demand for ownership, some of them being for rental. But I want to sort of highlight for the households that are 80% AMI and below, meaning that they're earning 80% or a little bit less than what the median income is for our community, that's where the vast majority of our demand is for housing. And so when we're talking about building affordable housing, we're sort of in our department sort of laser focused on the folks that are at 80% and below. And so that's what I'd like to talk about mostly. And I also just think it's important to really highlight again the connection with those experiencing houselessness and homelessness. Of course, this is not all, the demand is not 100% for people who are homeless, but I think that we have to always tie these two conversations together because they're very connected. And especially now when we know that many of our ohana are facing the possible impacts of what it means to really be housing burdened and to really have strain when it comes to their housing solutions. So I just want to, I'll try to not be super wonky, but I do want to talk a little bit from, Gavin made this way more approachable in talking about it from the perspective of what does it mean to be a household at 80% or a household at 60%. But I want to talk about it a little bit from sort of a regulatory perspective. And so, which is what we're often, the hat we often are wearing at the city and county. And so essentially, the area median income is set by HUD, by U.S. Housing, Department of Housing and Urban Development every year as a number. Okay, this is the amount, and this year in 2020, it was 101,600. This is the amount that is the average that a household is making. Okay, so this is not me saying that this is the best model. I think that there's a lot of really fair questions that come up over, is this the best way to determine affordability? But this is a model, and this is a way that we can talk about it. And so when we're talking about what is affordable, it is not some set amount, right? What is affordable, as we all know, depends upon our ohana, depends upon how big we are, how big our family is, how much money we're making, what area we're living in, what kinds of things that we want in our home, what is our capacity as a family, and that affordability changes, right, depending upon many factors. What this tries to do, what this HUD measurement tries to do is tries to say, okay, if your household, let's just take the first column, if you're a one-person household, which is where we see some of the greatest gaps of affordability, is for single earning households. This is a single person who does not have a second source of income or a partner to share expenses with. If we were to say that one person household is making, let's say, 80% of the area median income. Let's say one person, let's go the opposite way. Let's say I'm a single person and I'm making $44,000 a year. That's my personal income. Then I'm at 50% of the area median income. Right? I'm not anywhere near 80%. I'm not anywhere near 100%. I'm not anywhere near 120, 140%. And so when we're talking about what kind of affordable housing are we building, I think we need to talk more about who are we building the affordable housing for? Are we building affordable housing for people who are 80% AMI and below, meaning they're the top part of this chart? They're households that total income is capping out around 120 for a family of 5, or are we building housing for people who are above that? And when we look at rent, we translate that to then say, okay, as Gavin said, if you're spending 30% of your income, your gross income, on your housing expenses, then how much does that come out to? Okay, so even this is out of reach for many of our families, but even these numbers are, I think some of us would really desire to see more housing at these levels. So for example, if we looked at 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom homes, let's say I'm still gonna be that $44,000 a year single person, that means I'm at 50% of the area median income. So what's affordable for me for a 1-bedroom is $1,100, $1,181 a month. So when we're talking about building housing that's affordable for people who are at 50% AMI or below, then we're talking about people we're talking about units that are 1,100 or lower, right? We're not talking about a single person who's able to get a unit. Maybe they can get qualified for 1,600, but if they're only making an amount that can afford 1,100 a month, then that's not an affordable unit for that person. So, and then it goes further into translating into sale. And this is where I think Aloha Homes has been put forward as a great example of, okay, if we target, instead of targeting what would be affordable for someone at 140% of the area median income, meaning a household making more than what's the average median income? What if we're instead targeting prices that are at 80%? So we're actually lower than the average of what most of our families are making. Then what's quote affordable, even according to these guidelines, is going to be much lower. It's going to be something in the $300,000 range, as opposed to what we're seeing in the $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 range. So for our department, for Department of Community Services, our kuleana really again is around how are we focusing on creating housing for people who are 80% AMI and below, and how are we therefore making housing that is affordable at levels much lower than I think what we're used to seeing when we think about affordable housing. And so as a city as a whole, there's a couple of different areas of kuleana, and I don't touch them all, so I can speak sort of less authoritatively to some of the other areas. But our policy and strategy is largely set through the Mayor's Office of Housing. Regulatory work and incentive work is mostly done through Department of Planning and Permitting. So that's where I think a lot of people think of the city and county's role in affordable housing, is in whether we're creating rules and whether we're providing regulatory incentives to encourage private developers to build affordable housing, or requiring that they include affordable housing within their mix. The Department of Land Management does quite a bit around actually developing and managing affordable housing that is low income housing and low to moderate income housing. So this is housing that's traditionally going to be rented for people in 50, 60, and 80% AMI levels, some even lower. But they're actually managing some of the affordable housing inventory for the city. Under Mayor Caldwell, the Department of Land Management has increased the affordable housing inventory, nearly doubled it from what it was prior to Mayor Caldwell taking office. And that's been a real priority, is how do we bring on more projects, and how do we make sure that these strategically, following the strategy of Office of Housing, we're not just bringing on any units, right? We're bringing on units that actually are addressing the needs of low-income families and even homeless families. And then lastly, and it's in orange because that's our kuleana, is the Department of Community Services. And we really focus in around even lower income levels. I mentioned our maximum is 80% AMI, but we have programs that are at 60% AMI families, 30% AMI families, which is families that are really making at the poverty line or below, and then special needs housing that's meant to address the needs of, say, domestic violence survivors, specifically targeting persons who maybe have mental health that they're dealing with, substance abuse, developmental disorders, and sort of a range of other unique housing needs in our community. The things that we hone in on at DCS, sort of all the bubbles are sort of all the different areas that our department is responsible for. But in the affordable housing space, we're mostly focused on a few different ways that we touch things. So investing federal funds that we have kuleana for into 30% to 80% AMI housing development. And so, for example, Jeff, your question to Tyler about how can the city and DHHL partner, the city manages quite a bit of federal funds, including home funds. Home funds are specifically written in that they can go towards projects that are within the HHCA inventory. And so the federal funds that come to the city that are designated through the home program actually could directly go into investing in homestead projects. And in fact, we have in the past. So Halemakana o Nanakuli, for example, which is sort of in the back of Nanakuli villages, is a project that used home funds through the city to develop rentals that specifically benefit DHHL beneficiaries, just as an example. The city also manages housing choice vouchers. These are all sort of subsidy programs, housing first vouchers, vouchers for veterans. We also have a affordable housing fund that we manage. 0.5% of the real property taxes that come to the city automatically go into an affordable housing fund every year. And that ranges anywhere from 7 to 9 million a year. Those monies go in specifically to projects that are building and adding to the inventory 60% AMI rentals. So again, we're talking about housing that is affordable, and then a max rent that can be charged is going to be something that's affordable for a household at 60% AMI. Okay, so not at these higher levels, but at much lower levels. We have loan programs, 0% loan programs that help with down payment and rehabilitation of housing. We manage about 62 special needs housing, and then we have some development agreements that I think is sort of the exciting thing to shine a little bit of a light on, of potential scaling to sort of get at some of the things that I think Stanley tries to accomplish, Senator Chang tries to accomplish through Aloha Homes. So I think what I wanted to talk a little bit more about was this idea of community-based housing models. And I think there are a few examples that we hear talked about a lot. For me, a lot of this is about, I spent a lot of time in my life trying to think about how do we get more of our houses community housed? What's that pathway? And back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, everything was about sobriety first. You got to be sober, you got to have your life together, you got to have everything perfect before you can even get into housing. And that clearly didn't make sense for our homeless families who we know once they're in housing, they then have the opportunity to stabilize. They then have the opportunity to get wraparound services to support them with all the things that they need to stay stabilized. And so Mayor Caldwell has made it a really big priority to really invest in, and he was sort of been the first mayor to take on, okay, we are going to do housing first. Meaning we are going to first put people in homes, and then we're going to work with them to get everything else in their home, in their life together. And so that's what the intention of Housing First as a national policy has been. I think that now we're starting to see, okay, we need more scale. We need more of these projects. Now that our partners have figured out, okay, this is something that works, this is how it could work. The city has invested into programs that have worked. Now the question is, we need more. We need more locations. And for those that really are not traditionally served through, say, a condo in a unit, that's just not going to be something they ever move into, we're finding that their ability to be successful in housing is really maximized when we do something that's more community-based. We do something that's more about not just housing somebody, but housing them and providing community around them. And so—
Thank you, Becky. That's perfect, Becky, and I appreciate it. Our time is a little short. We still have one last presenter, but folks, great presentation. Obviously, plenty of resources and opportunities here with the city. Becky, we'll work to answer folks' questions by chat, but without further ado, I want to go to Gavin, and then when he's done, we're going to do a wrap up. So thank you, Becky. Gavin, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And I'm going to share my screen real quickly again, and here we go. So I started by talking about the history of the crisis and the problems. I'm going to start this by talking about the history of the solutions. And we've seen the same solutions pop up again and again. A report from 1970 suggesting that we use state land. Another one from 2018, we use state land. More efficient use of government resources recommended in 1971 and again in 2018. And then this is my favorite, tax increment financing. I'm not going to tell you what that is, but I will tell you that we progressed from consider the use of tax increment financing, that was back in 1971, to examine the feasibility of tax increment financing in 2018. Almost 50 years of progress there, not much progress at all. This is more recent history. Folks may have seen this, it's been in the press quite a bit. Folks may have weighed in on this project. Kawainui Apartments in Kailua was proposing to build a relatively large apartment complex that would have provided 7 units at $600 a month or less for rent, another 7 at $1,150 per month, 54 at under almost $1,400 per month. This just came out in Civil Beat yesterday, and there was another article in the Advertiser about the developer withdrawing the application because of community opposition. And we looked over at the testimony that was submitted, the petitions that were signed. 2,800 people weighed in on that project via testimony or petition. 625 submitted testimony for, 922 submitted testimony against. So for 50 years, we've been talking about the same solutions. When proposed solutions come up, when we have proposed affordable housing development projects, they are subject to vigorous debate and communities weighing in. If we're going to make progress on this, we need radical change. And there are 3 radical changes that we're looking at that we think are absolutely critical. With the Kavanui project, people who opposed it said over and over, we support affordable housing, just not here. What we need to do is capture all the energy that is going into the debate about these proposed solutions. Everybody wants affordable housing, but we can't agree on how to make it happen. And so we need to find a community engagement approach that allows us to get alignment among the different members of our community so that we can actually finally move on this issue. I just want to lift up, Jeff, maybe you could throw this in the chat, ahafellows.com. This is a group of fellows, just community members. You know, this isn't an issue that has been solved by people that are working on spreadsheets until their eyes bleed. It's an issue that's gonna be solved by people who are working to pay their rent until their knuckles bleed. I mean, this is an issue that needs to be solved by the people. This fellows effort and a related effort on an affordable housing coalition is trying to bring people together that are impacted by housing to lift up community voice so that we can find solutions. Another thing that we need to do is publicly produced housing. In Finland, in other areas around the world where they have addressed housing problems, they have significant publicly created housing. In the US, 96% of our housing is private. We have a serious homelessness problem. We have serious housing affordability problems as a result. And then finally, plan for affordability from the outset. I was just talking to someone about the stadium redevelopment and how at some point down the road, they're thinking about talking about affordable housing. It needs to be item number 1 on the agenda. We need to plan for it from the outset so that we don't have NIMBYism later and people say, I don't want this in my neighborhood. It needs to be in the neighborhood when that neighborhood is created at the beginning. So, thanks.
Gavin, thank you so much. There was a good question here about how well Hawaii is doing tapping the federal dollars that are out there for affordable housing. Do you have any sense of that, Hawaii Appleseed? I know you guys have been doing some research on that, but do you have anything to share with the group?
I mean, part of the problem is that there just aren't enough federal dollars out there. So, you know, I think there's this kind of general sense that we could be doing a little better. One of the main sources of federal money is the low-income housing tax credit. We use that, I think, to the best of our ability. Like, we use all those dollars. There's demand for that. There are other pots of money here and there that maybe we aren't maximizing. But this is a solution that really Hawaii needs to figure out. You know, we definitely need help on the federal level because they aren't providing enough resources, even if we use them all to their maximum benefit.
You know, another question here, Gavin, you know, about what we can do here, maybe. So the question got brought up, you know, there was legislation to legislate important agricultural lands. is there a possibility to legislate important housing lands? Question to you. Has that anything that you folks have heard or seen?
That's not something I'm terribly familiar with, but it seems to be aligned with this idea of prioritizing affordable housing. So I apologize, not super familiar.
I have a question I'd like to kind of chime in. Thank you, folks. What about solutions that lie within the current housing market, existing housing? I saw a couple of questions that kind of hinge on, you know, things that tap into the current housing market, whether it be military housing or short-term vacation rentals. Is that is addressing those? Is there a way to address those issues to kind of create affordable housing from existing housing?
Yeah, and there's been progress on the vacation rentals. You know, City and County of Honolulu, we were very concerned about proliferation of vacation rentals, especially out-of-state investors coming in, buying up properties, renting them out short term, you know, that money going offshore. City and County of Honolulu passed some legislation to clamp down on that, and my understanding is it's been relatively effective. But those types of things, I mean, it's going to get us closer, but just doing one of those things is nibbling around the edges. We need to have something that's more comprehensive. The military issue and the what's it called, housing stipends or whatever they call that they're getting. I mean, that definitely impacts housing costs, rent costs. Not something that Hawaii can solve on its own. Kind of out of our hands a little bit. But also an issue that would be helpful to work on for sure. And then lastly, I think the pandemic is potentially raising some opportunities that folks are looking closely at. I know folks are looking at repurposing hotels, you know, whether that might be a long-term solution. I also wonder about, you know, people doing this, doing the Zoom, already downtown office space, lots of vacancies. They're starting to convert those office spaces into residential. That's another possibility that might open up even more.
So mahalo. And you know, one more question along the lines of like policy and revenues, available revenues. You know, you answered a question earlier about access to federal dollars. Is there a way to generate revenue locally? You know, and let me back up a bit. The presentation that you shared and a lot of what we're hearing here, what Becky presented, it seems to be, I mean, not seems, we know there's an equity issue here, right? If you're wealthy, there's plenty of options, right? It's for folks that are making under a certain amount, which, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not an expert, but that's where, you know, low-income tax credits, federal dollars, state housing, you know, I know that there's a development fund. There's basically public programs for the state to invest or the counties to invest in creating affordable housing. And if there's a shortage of funds, if there's not enough funds, is there ways to generate more funds locally? And I'll throw out an example. You know, Hawaii has some of the lowest property taxes in America. Now, I'm not saying that everybody's property taxes should be raised, but we know that there are a lot of snowbirds or investment properties, folks that come here part-time, they own a vacation home, you know, very high real estate value. Has anybody studied what type of revenue could be generated by increasing the taxes on like the highest valued real estate, private real estate properties?
Yeah, in terms of like progressive revenue options, Davis, like that's the first place I would go is the property taxes. I can't rattle off figures on the potential there, But I think there is a lot of potential there for targeted property tax increases that aren't going to exacerbate the housing cost problem for the people that are really struggling, but that are going to capture tax and revenue from the wealthy folks that are coming in, who we're not able to capture income tax from them because they're not full-time residents here or even part-time residents earning income here. But we can get that revenue through the wealthy property owners. I definitely think that that is a place to focus.
Right, and just on that note, I've left out one very important program. Hawaiian Homelands is a program that also develops affordable housing that is never adequately funded, and for a gamut of reasons, the state legislature says that the funding isn't available and chooses not to fund it. So on that note, if we can generate the revenue, come up with good ideas to generate the revenue, and then create the pressure from the community by engaging, right, to call on our decision makers to invest in the programs that work, right? And it's not a magic bullet, and it's not going to be a one-off, okay, let's go give money to this program and then we're going to walk away from affordable housing. It is going to be a comprehensive effort that's going to take experts like yourselves and many, many, many others. Yeah, so this is my 2 cents. Mahalo nui. Jeff, hand it back to you.
Yeah, so I know we've only got a couple more minutes. There was a question about, will these presentations be online? So Gavin's presentation and Becky's presentation, I believe, making those available. I do know, Davis, this will be up on OHA's Facebook.
Right.
Folks will be able to view this, correct?
Yes, it'll be up on OHA's Facebook and our webpage. And that's oha.org/vote is where you can get all this information.
Great. Well, Davis, I really don't have much. I want to mahalo the presenters for your time. We're at 1 minute to go. Any last words, Davis, that you need to close us out on?
No, and I do want to. We have a couple minutes. I want to throw this out there. If and allow the panelists to just chime in one more time, especially Becky and Tyler. If I think that we have that there is a role for the community, right? And our role is to vote one. Obviously, we may not know exactly where every candidate is on a number of these issues, but candidates who are willing to engage, collaborate, work outside the box of norms, the same voices that come to the table and discuss these issues, the same developers, the same lobbyists. One thing I see here is relatively younger faces. The fact that Tyler is a deputy director at DHHL is to me it's a positive sign. Younger folks are going to come with a new community. It's a new community of people who are working that have a different understanding, different life experiences than the folks who's been in the trenches for many, many years. But not to disregard the role of those folks who have been doing this work, but it's important for us to engage fresh voices. And on that note, something like tackling property taxes, targeted increase in property taxes, which will come. Wealthy folks have access to lobbyists. They have access to candidates. It will be a battle. Advocating for DHHL to be adequately funded. The courts have said it. Legislature still doesn't do it. That's our fault. That's up to us. The legislature those are individuals who hold those positions because they're elected by us, right? The courts have said DHHL should be adequately funded. The legislature, year after year, makes excuses on why they don't do it. It's really unfortunate. And so I just want to hand it back to you folks real quick, and just maybe 1 minute or less, if you can share how the community can impact the work that you folks do on a day-to-day basis, and to maybe open up, if there's a way for the community to open up lanes for you folks. So Becky.
Just mahalo again. I mean, I think the biggest issue is advocacy, and having community really own projects. There are resources available. I mean, there's sorry I went on so long, Jeff. Thanks for cutting me off though, because I know we really wanted to hear from Gavin. But you know, there's so many projects, there's so many, I have like 30 slides. I'm gonna send them to whoever wants to share them. But there's so many things, like there are models that we can follow, and there's empty land, there's federal funding, there's county level funding. There needs to be more, in my opinion, more ownership to put ideas forward. And I think that there is a willingness right now to reach back and bring the resources to great projects. And we need more developers, and we need more communities welcoming this housing into their communities. And I think that you will find willing partners on the other side of the table. So mahalo.
Tyler.
Yeah, you know, coming from DHL, I recognize that not every answer I have is going to make everyone happy. I think people are right to be upset about the state of housing in the state of Hawaii, and I think therefore they're right to be upset with where we're at 100 years into a program that still has a massive waiting list. But for those of us who are here working at the department and my incredible staff, like, this is a really important mission, and we're all here to do it. And I think the beauty of Aloha Rising and the opportunity here is that the community, I think we need to be able to say, yeah, I don't agree with you, but the mission here is solving housing. The mission here is solving whatever the issue is, and we're going to stand together and we're going to move forward for that vision, regardless of how much I dislike the answer you just gave is. And I think that's really where community engagement and advocacy is. And you're right, there are all kinds of issues that we can hold people accountable for. And I think, to me, that's the most important thing is, you know, the department will continue to do the hard work that it does, and we hope that everyone can stand alongside us and move that forward. So nui ko mahalo ya oko pakahia pau for this opportunity, and I hope everyone stays safe and has a wonderful rest of the week.
Right on. Mahalo. Mahalo, Tyler. Gavin?
I would just say, you know, don't give up, speak up. Like, the way that we are going to solve this is by people speaking up about it. We have this long history of, you know, struggle, and we can get past that if people speak up about it. I'm going to share here in the chat, you know, a couple of websites that we have. Go there, please sign up for our mailing list. You can see what we're working on housing. And then again, the fellows, like, check that out. I feel like that is the beginning of something wonderful. That community engagement is absolutely key. So we need folks, we need everybody.
Right on. Mahalo. And before we wrap up, I just want to, again, mahalo everyone for joining us. Don't forget to vote. Ballots will be dropping the first week of October. If you're not registered, go to oilvr.hawaii.gov and get registered. Or you can do walk-in and same-day registration, same-day voter registration once the early voter centers open up. But you can get all this information. You can check out these webinars and all the information on elections, important dates on our website at oha.org/vote. And for those of you that are tuned into Zoom, you're going to get a survey once you, I think, close this window out. So please take a few minutes to respond to that survey. Any last thoughts, Jeff?
No, just to thank everybody and to do a little plug. October 8th, the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement will be having their Housing Caucus webinar set up very similarly as this, but it will be talking about, even more specifically, policy, specific policy, specific legislation, specific action that communities are taking and moving. And these are actions and policy that are not led by public officials. This is policy, legislation, action done by community for community. And so anybody on this webinar, maybe I can tap Davis and we can do some sharing of that information for the Housing Caucus, since you folks have registered in. But nobody's going to come save us. It's us, right? We got to do this. So mahalo everybody in Davis and all the attendees.
Yeah, mahalo nui, gang. Appreciate it. Yeah, so take care, stay safe. And don't forget to vote. And mahalo. And join us next week. We'll be talking about tourism and the future of our economy in Hawaii. We have a great moderator, Mahina Paishan Duarte, and a handful of really fabulous guests. So, yep, tune in next week, Thursday. And mahalo for joining us. Stay safe, everyone. Mahalo mapono. Aloha.
Aloha.